The rain hammered against the sidewalk, a chaotic symphony that drowned out the hum of the city. Underneath a flimsy umbrella, Kate Collins sprinted toward the end of her shift at Brewhouse Cafe, soaked to the bone and exhausted beyond words. She should have gone straight home. Anyone else would have, but something deep inside her refused to let the night end that way. Across the street, a group of children huddled beneath a bus stop shelter, shivering in the storm. Without hesitation, Kate veered off course, clutching her meager tips tightly in her hand. From a tinted black SUV parked across the street, Ethan Ward watched the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. His assistant had warned him, "She's different, sir." But Ethan didn't believe in fairy tales about good-hearted nobodies. People were transactional, predictable. Yet here was Kate, spending the little she had on strangers, while most others only looked away. He leaned forward, intrigued against his better judgment, as she crossed the street with a paper bag full of sandwiches. Kate knelt, her jeans soaking up the rainwater pooling at the curb. She handed out the sandwiches one by one, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry, it's not much," she said to a boy no older than 10, wrapping a sandwich in his small hands. The boy's face lit up like it was Christmas morning. Ethan felt something sharp twist in his chest, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Empathy? Pity? He wasn't sure. And he hated not being sure. Inside the SUV, Ethan's driver adjusted the rearview mirror awkwardly, stealing a glance at his boss. "Should we head out, Mr. Ward?" Ethan said nothing, eyes fixed on Kate. She was laughing now, sharing jokes with the kids, even as the rain matted her hair and soaked her coat through. It wasn't logical, it wasn't efficient, and yet it was disarmingly human. He finally tore his gaze away and muttered, "Not yet." Kate stood finally cold and shaking, and the children chorused a clumsy thank you that echoed above the rain. She smiled, a raw and genuine smile that seemed too big for such a small act of kindness. Ethan's driver, sensing the mood, started the car silently, but Ethan's mind was already racing far ahead. Who was this girl who gave without expecting anything, and why was he, of all people, unable to look away? The next morning at Brewhouse, Kate wore the same frayed sneakers, the same worn apron. She hummed while she cleaned the espresso machine, ignoring the aching chill that had settled into her bones overnight. Her co-worker, Sasha, nudged her playfully. "You're gonna catch pneumonia if you keep playing superhero out there," she said. Kate just shrugged, wiping the counter with a grin. "If it was your brother out there in the rain, wouldn't you hope someone cared?" Unbeknownst to Kate, Ethan Ward stood right outside, coffee in hand, blending into the busy street crowd. He watched her laugh, brush a lock of hair from her face, tease Sasha back. She wasn't performing for anyone. That was what unsettled him the most. She wasn't trying to be noticed. He was the one who had noticed anyway, and now he couldn't stop. Later that afternoon, a corporate meeting thundered on in Ethan's downtown. Skyscraper, numbers, charts, growth projections, all noise. Ethan sat at the head of the boardroom table, barely listening. His mind replayed the image of a girl, soaked to the skin, handing sandwiches to strangers. Ward Enterprises must prioritize community engagement, an executive droned on. Ethan's lips twisted into a sardonic smile. They would fund charities with 6-figure checks and tax breaks, never once getting their hands wet. After the meeting, Ethan closed himself in his office, a sleek glass cube towering above the city. He scrolled through employee files on his tablet until he found her, Kate Collins, part-time barista, no college degree, minimal savings, no criminal record, no lawsuits, just ordinary. Yet the memory of her laughter under the rain gnawed at the walls he'd built around himself. Ethan clenched his jaw. "What the hell are you doing, Ward?" he whispered to the empty room. The next day, Kate's world tilted, As she prepped coffee, the cafe door swung open and in walked Ethan Ward himself, impeccably dressed, radiating money and power like a second skin. The entire cafe fell into a stunned hush. Kate nearly dropped the portafilter she was holding. She had seen him before, on magazine covers, on billboards, but seeing him in person, locking eyes with her, made her stomach twist into impossible knots. Without breaking eye contact, Ethan stepped up to the counter. "Black coffee, no sugar." His voice was calm, steady, commanding. Kate fumbled slightly but managed to pour his coffee without disaster. She handed it over with trembling fingers. "On the house," she mumbled, cheeks burning. Ethan took the cup, a flicker of something, approval, amusement crossing his face. "I'd rather pay for what's worth it," he said, dropping a $20 bill into the tip jar without a second glance. The cafe buzzed with whispers as Ethan turned and walked out, but Kate stood frozen. Her heart raced so loudly she could barely hear herself think. Why had he come here? Why now? And why did it feel like the ground had just shifted under her feet? Outside, Ethan slid into his car, smirking slightly to himself. This girl was either the most naive person he'd ever met, or something else entirely. He was going to find out which. That night, Kate walked home alone, clutching her jacket tighter against the wind. She should feel happy. A celebrity had come into her cafe after all, but a sense of unease gnawed at her. She didn't want to be noticed, not like this, not by someone like him. She needed to stay invisible. She needed to survive. And she knew, deep down, that men like Ethan Ward never noticed girls like her without a reason. Across the street, under the shadow of a flickering street lamp, Ethan Ward stood again, watching. Only this time, his interest wasn't passing curiosity. It was something deeper, something dangerous. And in that moment, as Kate disappeared into the misty night, Ethan made a silent vow. He was going to pull her into his world, one way or another. The following morning, Kate pushed open the cafe doors, half expecting to see Ethan Ward seated at the counter again. But the place was blessedly ordinary. Burnt coffee smell, jazz music on the speakers, Sasha waving lazily from the pastry counter. Kate let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Maybe yesterday had been a fluke. Maybe people like him dipped into places like hers just to feel connected for a moment and then forgot. She tied her apron tighter and set to work, focusing on the mundane rhythm of brewing, pouring, serving. The normalcy helped her steady the storm swirling inside her chest. Yet, despite herself, every time the doorbell chimed, her heart leapt to her throat. Every time a man in a suit walked in, she braced herself for his piercing gaze. Ethan Ward had disturbed something in her, something that wouldn't settle easily back into place. Across town, in the gleaming offices of Ward Enterprises, Ethan reviewed quarterly reports with mechanical efficiency. His team presented record profits, ambitious expansions, partnerships with foreign investors. He should have been pleased. But instead, he found himself doodling absent-mindedly on the margins of his meeting notes, a tiny sketch of a coffee cup and raindrops. When the meeting finally adjourned, he didn't go straight back to work. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, thinking about Kate Collins. The name had lodged itself into his mind like a splinter. He had wealth, influence, entire cities that bent to his will, but he couldn't command this feeling to leave, and he hated that. Emotion was dangerous. It led to weakness. He knew it better than anyone. Yet here he was, wondering if she had dried off properly last night, if she was still giving away half her wages to strangers without a second thought. That afternoon, while Kate was wiping down tables, the cafe manager, Mr. Hollis, called her over with a nervous smile. "Kate, a client left you this," he said, handing her a small envelope. Confused, she wiped her hands on her apron and opened it. Inside was a simple note. "You deserve more than rain-soaked sidewalks. E.W." Folded behind it was a black business card embossed with Ethan Ward's personal number. Her breath caught. Sasha swooped in the moment Kate's hands started trembling. "Whoa, girl, who's EW?" she teased, trying to peek over Kate's shoulder. Kate stuffed the card into her pocket so fast she nearly dropped it. "Nobody," she lied, forcing a smile. But her mind was racing. Was it a warning? A trap? Or something? Worse, a chance she couldn't afford to take. She shoved the envelope deep into her bag, vowing to forget about it. But forgetting wasn't so simple. That night, Kate lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of her tiny apartment. The card burned against her thigh, where it lay tucked inside her jeans pocket. She replayed the note over and over in her head. "You deserve more." What did he mean? More money, more recognition, more life. Her walls, the ones she'd built stone by stone since childhood, creaked under the weight of the unknown. Meanwhile, Ethan poured himself a whiskey in his penthouse, staring out over the glittering skyline. He didn't know why he had written the note. He never left personal messages, ever. But something about Kate's quiet resilience gnawed at him. She didn't ask for help. She didn't beg for attention. She just existed fiercely, honestly, and that terrified him, because he wasn't sure he could control what that honesty might unlock inside him. The next day, Kate found herself at a crossroads, literally. After her shift, she stood at the corner where two streets diverged, one toward her bus stop, the other toward Ward Enterprises. The card in her pocket felt like a magnet. Her heart hammered against her ribs, every survival instinct screaming at her to run the opposite way. But something stronger, curiosity, maybe hope, propelled her feet forward. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not Sasha, not her landlord, not even herself, really. She just walked, one step at a time, until the corporate towers loomed above her like steel gods. She felt so small standing there, craning her neck up at the polished glass that reflected nothing of her own scrappy reflection. This was his world. Was there any room for someone like her inside it? At the reception desk, she hesitated. "I'm here to see Ethan Ward," she said, wincing at how absurd it sounded aloud. The receptionist barely blinked. "Name?" Kate's mouth went dry. "Kate Collins." A few keystrokes later, the woman smiled, faintly. "He's expecting you." Expecting her? Kate's stomach dropped. This wasn't a whim for him. He had planned for her to come. That realization both thrilled and terrified her. She was led into a private elevator, rising so fast her ears popped. At the top floor, the doors slid open into a cavernous office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Ethan stood at the far end, hands in his pockets, staring out over the city like he owned it, which, in a way, he did. For a moment he didn't move. Neither did she. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, one misstep away from falling. Finally, he turned, their eyes locked, the distance between them crackling with unspoken words. "You came," he said simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Kate forced her legs to move forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. "I don't know why," she confessed quietly. Ethan's mouth curved into a smile that wasn't mocking. It was something infinitely more dangerous. "Maybe you came because you're tired of settling." Kate opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came out. He was wrong. She wasn't tired of her life. She was surviving, thriving even, wasn't she? Doubt gnawed at her resolve for the first time in years. Ethan stepped closer, slow and deliberate, like a predator who knew the prey was already caught. "Or maybe," he said, voice low and rough, "you came because you finally want to see what you're really capable of." Kate stood frozen, heart pounding so hard it blurred her vision. In that moment, it wasn't about coffee shops or money or even charity. It was about the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that she was meant for something more, and that this man, this infuriating stranger, saw it before she did. Ethan extended a hand toward her, palm open, waiting, and Kate realized with chilling clarity that if she took it, her life would never be the same again. Kate stared at Ethan's outstretched hand, a war raging inside her. Every survival instinct screamed to turn around and run, to reject anything that came so easily, so dangerously. But there was a voice, too, one she hadn't heard in years, whispering, "You deserve more." Before she could think better of it, she placed her trembling hand into his. The contact was electric, real. It felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Ethan's fingers curled around hers firmly, grounding her before he released her with surprising gentleness. "Come," he said, nodding toward a small lounge area by the windows. She followed, legs shaky, heart hammering against her ribs. The lounge was minimalist. 2 leather chairs, a glass table, and the endless sprawl of the city below. Sitting here felt like hovering above the world, like nothing down there could ever touch you. As she sat, Ethan settled into the chair opposite, her casual yet impossibly imposing. He didn't waste time. "I have a proposition," he said. Kate stiffened immediately. There it was, the catch. There's always a catch when powerful men notice girls like her. "I'm not for sale," she said coolly, crossing her arms. Ethan smirked, as if he expected the reaction. "I'm not offering to buy you, Kate." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "I'm offering you a choice. Stay where you are, spinning your wheels, playing it safe, or step into a world that will demand everything from you, but give you everything in return." Kate blinked, thrown. "What do you want from me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's answer was maddeningly simple. "I want you to lead something real." He slid a folder across the table. Kate hesitated before picking it up. Inside were documents outlining a project, a community center funded by Ward Enterprises, designed to help underprivileged youth. Scholarships, job training, health clinics, the works. "I could hire any professional to run it," Ethan said. "But they would do it for the paycheck. You, Kate, you'd do it because you care." Kate's hands shook slightly as she flipped through the pages. It was overwhelming, bigger than anything she had ever touched. "Why me?" she asked, suspicious. Ethan's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "Because you're the only person I've seen get drenched in a storm to feed strangers, and not once. Look for a camera to capture it." His voice dropped lower. "Because you still believe people are worth saving." Kate bit her lip, heart thrumming painfully. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she could do something this important. But doubt was a weed too deeply rooted. "I'm not qualified," she said. "I'm nobody." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Stop saying that." His voice was so fierce it startled her. "You are not nobody. They just made you believe it." There was silence between them for a moment, heavy and charged. Finally, Ethan spoke again, softer now. "You don't have to answer today, but think about it." He stood, signaling the meeting was over. Kate rose slowly, folder clutched to her chest like a shield. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "If I say yes," she said quietly, "what's the catch?" Ethan's smile was humorless. "There's no catch, Kate. Only the truth." She frowned. "And what's the truth?" He met her eyes without blinking. "The truth is, once you start believing in yourself, there's no going back to the small life you've been surviving." Kate didn't reply. She simply nodded and walked out, her mind a whirlwind of fear and hope and disbelief. The city felt louder as she stepped. Outside, harsher somehow. She pressed the folder tighter against herself as she boarded the bus back to her crumbling apartment. The other passengers barely looked at her, each lost in their own battles. Kate stared out the window, Ethan's words replaying in her mind. "Once you start believing in yourself, there's no going back." Was she ready for that? That night, she spread the papers across her tiny kitchen table. Numbers, budgets, plans, it all blurred together. But at the heart of it, she saw glimpses of what it could become. A place where kids like she had once been could dream bigger. where survival didn't have to be the only goal. She closed her eyes, letting herself imagine it, letting herself want it. Across town, Ethan sipped whiskey on his penthouse balcony, watching the city sparkle beneath him. He didn't know if Kate would say yes, but for the first time in a long time, he realized he cared about the outcome. He wasn't just curious anymore. He was invested. And if he was honest with himself, a dangerous habit, he wasn't sure who was risking more, Kate or him. At 2 a.m., Kate was still awake, tracing the outlines of the folder with trembling fingers. She could play it safe, stay behind the counter for the rest of her life, unnoticed, untouched. Or she could jump and maybe fall, maybe fail spectacularly, but for once, maybe failure would be better than fear. She whispered into the darkness, "Maybe I'm tired of surviving." The next morning, she stood outside Ward Enterprises again, folder in hand. The building loomed above her like a final exam she hadn't studied for. She almost turned around. Almost. But then she remembered the boy's smile at the bus stop, the way Ethan said, "You are not nobody," and she stepped forward, one foot, then another. She pressed the call button. The elevator dinged softly. She stepped inside, heart pounding in her ears. As the floors ticked by, Kate realized this wasn't just a new job. It wasn't just a new chapter. It was war against every voice that ever told her she was small, disposable, forgettable. And as the doors slid open to the executive floor, she braced herself for the first battle, facing Ethan Ward again, with her answer. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the top floor bathed in golden morning light. Kate hesitated for only a second before stepping out, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the marble floor. Ethan was already waiting near the window, his silhouette etched against the sprawling skyline. He turned when he heard her approach, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Hope, maybe, or simply calculation. Kate held the folder to her chest like armor. Without saying a word, she walked to the center of the room and set the folder down on the sleek glass table. Between them, Ethan arched an eyebrow, waiting. Kate took a deep breath, steadying her voice. "I'm in," she said simply. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Ethan's mouth curved into something dangerously close to a real smile. Not the polite mask he wore in public, but something rawer, sharper. "You won't regret this," he said, his voice low and certain. Kate almost laughed. "I already do," she admitted, surprising them both. But Ethan didn't seem offended. If anything, the corners of his mouth lifted even higher, as if he respected the honesty. "Good," he said, nodding once. "Fear keeps you sharp. Doubt keeps you humble. But don't let either paralyze you, Kate." He slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside, Kate found a contract, a real one, with her name printed neatly at the top. Benefits, salary, terms. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. Her throat tightened painfully. She could pay off her debts, move out of her crumbling apartment, save for a future she had never dared dream about. But more than the money, it was the faith someone had finally placed in her. Kate skimmed the contract with trembling fingers. She expected fine print, tricks, traps, but it was clean, transparent, straightforward. Ethan watched her carefully, studying every flicker of emotion that crossed her face. "Sign when you're ready," he said, sliding a silver pen across the table. "But know this, once you do, you're not allowed to play small anymore. Not here, not ever again." For a moment, Kate hesitated, not because she didn't want it, but because wanting it so badly scared her. Then slowly, deliberately, she picked up the pen and signed her name. The scratch of ink against paper felt final, monumental, like sealing a fate she hadn't even fully imagined yet. She set the pen down, meeting Ethan's gaze head-on. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Ethan said, rising to his full, imposing height, "we get to work." He led her across the office to a second door she hadn't noticed before. Beyond it lay a conference room, and inside a massive whiteboard covered in notes, timelines, blueprints. This wasn't a vague idea. This was a machine already in motion, waiting only for someone to drive it. "You're the director," he said simply. "You answer only to me." Kate's stomach twisted with a blend of terror and exhilaration. Director. Her. It felt impossible. It felt inevitable. She glanced at the chaotic planning notes, community outreach strategies, volunteer programs, fundraising ideas. "You've been planning this for a while," she said slowly. Ethan shrugged, almost dismissive. "Ideas are easy. Execution is hard. That's why I needed you." The words hit her harder than she expected. Not wanted, needed. She straightened her shoulders a little. "Where do we start?" Ethan's eyes gleamed with something almost predatory. Approval. "We start with showing them you're not just some girl behind a coffee counter," he said. "We start by making them believe you belong here as much as anyone else." Kate nodded, swallowing her fear. They spent the next few hours diving into plans. Ethan's mind was razor-sharp, relentless, pushing her to think bigger, move faster, dream louder. Whenever she faltered, he caught her with a single look, a silent dare not to give up. It was exhausting, it was exhilarating, and for the first time in a long time, Kate felt alive. Like she was stepping into shoes she'd always been meant to fill. By late afternoon, they were both hoarse from talking. Ethan finally leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. "Go home," he said. "Rest. Tomorrow we start officially." Kate hesitated. She hated leaving things unfinished, but her body ached from the adrenaline crash. She gathered her things slowly, careful not to let the hope blooming inside her show too much. Hope was dangerous. Hope could break you. As she turned to leave, Ethan called her name softly. She paused, hand on the door. "Kate," he said, voice roughened by something she couldn't quite place. "You did good today." The words froze her in place. She wasn't used to praise, wasn't used to mattering. She looked back at him, and for once found no mockery, no manipulation in his eyes, just belief, and maybe something even deeper. She managed a small smile before slipping out the door, heart hammering wildly against her ribs. As she rode the elevator down, her reflection stared back at her from the polished chrome walls. A girl who no longer looked invisible. A girl who might actually have a future. Outside, the city pulsed with life, and for once it didn't feel indifferent to her existence. It felt like a challenge she was finally ready to accept. But across town, in the smoky confines of a luxury bar, another pair of eyes watched a different set of documents with cold calculation. A rival executive studying a grainy photo of Ethan and Kate together. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. There was always a price for rising too quickly, always a way to tear down what others had built, and he was already plotting how to destroy them both before they even realized the war had begun. The next morning dawned crisp and cold, but Kate felt a strange warmth buzzing through her veins. She dressed carefully, no tattered sneakers today, and made her way to Ward Enterprises with a determination she barely recognized in herself. As she rode the elevator to the top floor, she repeated Ethan's words in her mind like a mantra. "You belong here." She straightened her shoulders as the doors opened. Ethan was waiting for her, already immersed in emails and spreadsheets. He glanced up, offering a nod that was more intimate than a smile. "Ready for your first battlefield?" he asked. Kate's mouth was dry, but she nodded. "Good," he said, standing. "Your first meeting is at 10. You'll be introducing the center's preliminary plans to the board." Kate's stomach twisted. She hadn't realized her plunge into the deep end would be quite so immediate. The boardroom felt colder than the rest of the building. Long table, glass walls, men and women in suits worth more than Kate's annual income lined the seats. Their faces sharp and suspicious. She could feel their gazes dissecting her, too young, too inexperienced, too insignificant. She swallowed her fear and took a breath. Ethan sat silently at the far end, offering no help, no cues. This was her moment to stand or to crumble. She stepped forward, palms sweaty, and began to speak. At first, her voice trembled, barely rising above a whisper. But as she moved through the presentation, the scholarships, the clinics, the job, fairs, something inside her shifted. These weren't just numbers on a page. They were lives, futures. She found her rhythm, her passion, and by the time she finished, the room was silent, not with disdain, but with something closer to stunned interest. The chairman, a balding man with shrewd eyes, finally broke the silence. "Ambitious," he said, tapping his pen against his teeth, "and refreshingly human." Kate exhaled, barely hiding her relief. Ethan, across the table, gave a single nod of approval, small but devastatingly meaningful. Kate's chest swelled. For once, she hadn't just survived, she had won. She gathered her notes and left the room, head held high. But in the shadows of the boardroom, not everyone clapped silently. One man in particular, Leon Grant, a rival, executive within Ward Enterprises, watched Kate with narrowed eyes. Ethan's attention had shifted, his priorities were changing, and Leon knew from experience. When powerful men cared about the wrong things, they left vulnerabilities wide open. Leon smiled thinly. He had seen careers destroyed over much less. Later that day, Kate sat at her new desk, a real one, not behind a counter, and reviewed incoming proposals. Ethan had an entire floor cleared for the community center's headquarters. It felt surreal. She kept waiting for someone to tap her shoulder, laugh, and tell her it was all a joke. But no one came. Instead, she worked late into the evening, driven by a hunger she couldn't fully name. As she packed up to leave, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Watch your back." Her blood ran cold. She scanned the empty office floor, heart thudding painfully against her ribs. No one, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the whisper of air vents. She deleted the message immediately, convincing herself it was spam, a fluke, nothing more. Meanwhile, across the city, Leon raised his glass in a dark corner of a private club. "Soon," he murmured to his companions, other executives, old money types who thrived on chaos. "Soon she'll fall, and Ward will fall with her." They clinked their glasses, sealing the beginning of a very private war. A war Kate didn't even know she was already fighting. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Meetings, site visits, budget approvals. Kate moved through it all with a single-minded intensity that even surprised Ethan. She was tireless, efficient, creative. And every time she doubted herself, she remembered the children's faces under that bus-stop shelter. She wasn't doing this for her. She was doing it for them, for every kid who thought they didn't matter. One evening, as she reviewed blueprints alone, Ethan appeared beside her without warning. "You're burning out," he said softly. Kate didn't look up. "I'm fine." He crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "You're allowed to breathe, you know." For a moment, Kate saw something raw in his eyes. Worry, perhaps even fear. She smiled faintly. "Breathing is a luxury," she said. Ethan didn't argue. He just sat quietly beside her. It was strange. The way silence between them had changed. It wasn't awkward now. It was a comfort, like two soldiers resting between battles. Kate glanced at him from the corner of her eye. In the fluorescent glow, Ethan looked tired too. Human. Fallible. She wondered what he had sacrificed to climb to this height, and whether it had been worth it. Maybe ambition had a cost neither of them fully understood yet. As the clock neared midnight, Ethan finally stood. "Come on," he said, extending his hand. Kate stared at it for a long moment before taking it. He led her outside, where the city still buzzed with life, but somehow felt quieter, softer. They walked in silence for a few blocks, neither speaking, neither needing to. For the first time in days, Kate felt the tension uncoil from her shoulders. But as they turned a corner, a figure lurked in the shadows, watching, waiting, reporting, and the first move of the coming war was already in play. The next morning, Kate arrived early at Ward Enterprises, earlier than usual, the building still yawning awake around her. She relished these rare moments of solitude, the click of her heels against the marble, the hum of lights flickering on one by one. It gave her a false sense of control, of calm, before the inevitable chaos. She moved through the lobby, unaware that 2 floors above her, someone was already plotting. Leon Grant sat in a small glass office, nursing a cup of black coffee, his expression carved from stone. On his desk lay a dossier, thin but deadly, photos of Kate, screenshots of public records, rumors, half-truths, innuendos. It wasn't much, yet. But Leon knew how easily reputations crumbled with the right whisper campaign. And Kate Collins had just become his favorite project. Downstairs, Kate reviewed the morning's agenda. Contractor meetings, a budget adjustment, discussion, a sit-down with Ethan to finalize a press release. She smiled faintly, feeling the familiar knot of nerves in her stomach. She didn't mind the fear anymore. Fear meant she cared. Fear meant she was still alive. She tucked the folders under her arm and headed to the conference room, oblivious to the trap slowly tightening around her. Ethan greeted her with his usual directness. "Board approved the first round of funding," he said, handing her a signed authorization form. Kate's heart skipped. "Already?" she breathed. Ethan smirked. "You're doing better than you think, Kate." She ducked her head to hide the rush of warmth that spread across her chest. No matter how far she rose, his praise would always land harder than she wanted to admit. Throughout the day, everything seemed almost too smooth. Meetings ran on time. Contractors promised miracles. Even the notoriously cranky finance director complimented her work ethic. By late afternoon, Kate leaned back in her chair, exhausted but exhilarated. Maybe, just maybe, she thought, she was finally getting ahead. Maybe, for once, she wasn't just surviving, she was winning. But victories, Kate would learn, often come with a price tag hidden in fine print. At 7 p.m., as she gathered her things to leave, an email popped into her inbox. Subject line, urgent, media request. She frowned and opened it. Her blood ran cold. A gossip blog notorious for tearing down public figures had requested a comment about her, about allegations she had exploited her connection with Ethan Ward for personal gain. Attached was a draft of the article, full of lies, speculation, poison. Kate's knees buckled and she sank into her chair. The words blurred before her eyes. Kate Collins, the former barista-turned-executive, reportedly leveraged a personal relationship with CEO Ethan Ward to ascend the corporate ladder. It got worse with every paragraph. Anonymous sources, fabricated timelines, twisted facts. The email ended with a chilling sentence. Publication deadline, tomorrow 9 a.m. unless provided with a statement. She bolted upright, heart racing barely, noticing when her phone slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Bile rose in her throat, panic clawed at her ribs. She had worked so hard to build something honest, something real, and now it could all be destroyed overnight by someone she couldn't even see. The unfairness of it burned through her like acid. Frantic, she considered deleting the email, pretending it didn't exist, but deep down she knew better. Ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. She needed to act, and fast. She grabbed her phone and with shaking fingers called Ethan. He picked up on the second ring. "Kate?" His voice sharpened. Instantly at her silence, "What's wrong?" She squeezed her eyes shut. "I need to see you now." Within minutes, she was in his office, pacing like a trapped animal, while he read the email over her shoulder. His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "Leon," he growled, voice low and dangerous. Kate froze. "You know who did this?" Ethan met her gaze, fury burning in his. "He's been circling for weeks. I didn't think he'd move this fast." Kate's stomach dropped. "What do we do?" she whispered. Ethan exhaled slowly, the air between them charged and crackling. "We don't play defense," he said. "We hit back harder." His certainty was terrifying and oddly comforting. For the first time, Kate understood why people followed Ethan Ward so willingly. He didn't bow, he didn't break. He fought, and expected you to fight too. But even as Ethan mapped out a counter-strategy, legal teams, public relations interventions, Kate couldn't shake a sinking feeling in her gut. Because deep down, she knew the damage was already done. Perception mattered. Public opinion was bloodthirsty. And no matter how much she fought, some people would always believe the worst about a girl like her who dared to climb too high. As Ethan barked orders into his phone, rallying the troops, Kate slipped quietly out of his office. She wandered the empty halls of Ward Enterprises, the weight of the coming storm pressing down on her chest. She thought of the children at the bus stop, the center she hadn't even opened yet, the fragile future she was trying to build. All of it teetered now on the edge of ruin. She stopped by the massive glass windows overlooking the city, her reflection faint in the darkened pane. A nobody, she thought. That's what they'll call me. That's what they'll always see. But then she remembered Ethan's voice, fierce and unrelenting. "You are not nobody." She pressed a trembling hand against the cold glass, staring out into the night. She was tired of surviving. But was she ready to fight? Kate barely slept that night. She lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of her apartment. The words from the article draft seared into her mind. They painted her as an opportunist, a social climber, a liar. It didn't matter that none of it was true. It didn't matter that she had worked herself raw for every inch of progress. The world didn't care about truth. It cared about stories. By dawn, her phone was already buzzing, with notifications, journalists, unknown numbers. Even some old acquaintances who hadn't spoken to her in years, suddenly curious. Kate turned off the phone and threw it across the room, burying her head in her hands. She couldn't fight this on her own. She couldn't outrun it either. The only path forward was through, and that terrified her more than anything. At 8 sharp, Kate returned to Ward Enterprises, feeling like she was walking into a battlefield. The lobby buzzed differently now. Whispers, stolen glances, subtle sneers. She felt their judgment cling to her skin like smoke. But she lifted her chin and kept walking. She refused to let them see her crack. If they wanted a show, she would give them strength, not tears. Ethan was already waiting in his office, pacing like a caged predator. His eyes snapped to her the moment she entered. "We're suing for defamation," he said without preamble. "Full assault, no negotiations." Kate swallowed hard. She hated this. She hated needing to be rescued. But more than that, she hated the thought of everything she had built being reduced to a tabloid headline. Leon Grant's name surfaced everywhere that day, whispered in corners, mentioned in strained conversations. He denied involvement publicly, of course, but his fingerprints were all over the attack. Rumors multiplied like rot. Some employees kept their distance from Kate, others offered fake smiles. A few brave ones, mostly younger staffers who had seen her work up close, still met her eyes with respect. The board called an emergency meeting. Kate wasn't invited. She sat outside the glass conference room, watching silhouettes argue behind frosted glass. Every minute felt like an hour. Ethan fought fiercely inside, his voice sometimes rising above the others. Kate couldn't hear the words, but she recognized the emotion. Fury, betrayal, defiance. She clutched her coffee cup so hard it cracked. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened, and Ethan strode out, face grim. He met her gaze, a silent message passing between them. Not over yet. She stood, legs shaky but determined, and followed him back to his office. "They're worried about the center," he said once the door shut behind them. "Worried about funding. Optics. Cowards." His voice was like a blade, sharp and cold. Kate's heart twisted painfully. "Are they shutting it down?" she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not if I can help it." He paused, watching her carefully. "But you need to be prepared, Kate. This isn't fair, it isn't right. But it's real." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle into her bones. She had stepped into this world willingly. Now she had to survive it. For the next few hours, they strategized. Public statements, media counters, alliances inside the company. Every move felt like playing chess blindfolded, the stakes higher than anything Kate had ever imagined. But through it all, Ethan never once suggested she quit. Never once implied she wasn't strong enough, and that, more than anything, kept her going. Later, exhausted and hollow, Kate sat alone in the employee lounge staring at a cup of cold coffee. Sasha slid into the seat across from her without a word. For a long moment, they just sat there, two girls from different worlds, both tired of pretending. Finally, Sasha spoke. "You're not what they're saying you are." Kate blinked, fighting tears. "I know," she whispered. Sasha reached across the table, squeezing her hand briefly. "You fight, Kate, you hear me? You fight until they choke on their lies." Then she was gone, leaving Kate blinking after her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to kindle something inside her, a tiny spark, a stubborn refusal to let them write her story for her. She wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. Night fell. The city outside glittered indifferently. Kate stood by the window of Ethan's office, watching the lights blur through the glass. Behind her, Ethan ended a call with their legal team and ran a hand through his hair, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. "We'll weather this," he said quietly. "I promise." She believed him. She had to, because believing was the only thing left. As they stood there, side by side, the silence between them thickened into something heavy, almost tangible. Not fear, not even anger. It was resolve, a pact unspoken but binding. They would not go down easily, they would not bow. Not to Leon, not to the world that had already decided their worth. Together, they would burn their own path through the darkness. But deep in the bowels of the city, Leon Grant smiled over a new set of documents. Evidence, real this time. Evidence that could destroy everything. And the worst part, it came from someone Kate trusted. Kate had no idea how thin the ice beneath her feet had become. She moved through the next day with mechanical efficiency, attending meetings, responding to emails, reviewing proposals. Outwardly calm, inwardly fractured. The whispers hadn't stopped. If anything, they had grown sharper, more poisonous. But she refused to let the vultures circling see her bleed. Not yet. Ethan fought beside her, shielded her when he could. But Kate understood now. He couldn't fight all her battles. Some wars had to be waged alone. She began drafting her own statement, clear, dignified, defiant. She would not apologize for existing. She would not beg for forgiveness she didn't owe. Every word she typed felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. At noon, a courier arrived with a package addressed to her in careful, anonymous script. Kate frowned, hesitating before opening it. Inside, she found a flash drive and a note. "You deserve to know the truth." Her hands trembled slightly as she plugged the drive into her laptop. A series of documents opened, emails, contracts, meeting transcripts, and at the center of it all, Sasha's name. For a long moment, Kate simply stared, unable to process what she was seeing. Sasha, her friend, her confidant, had been feeding Leon information for weeks. Casual slips, offhand comments, details about Kate's schedule, her weaknesses, her fears. The betrayal tasted metallic in her mouth, bitter and choking. She slammed the laptop shut, nausea rolling through her. The worst part wasn't the information. It was how easy it had been for Sasha to betray her, and how blind Kate had been to it. Tears threatened, but Kate forced them back. There was no time for self-pity. She needed to think, act. She wiped her palms against her skirt and stood, heart pounding. She needed to confront Sasha, but not recklessly. Not yet. She needed to be smart, strategic. Just like Ethan had taught her, she needed to hit back where it hurt the most. That evening, as shadows stretched long across the office floors, Kate found Sasha alone by the coffee machines. She approached slowly, carefully, studying the girl who had once laughed with her, shared late-night complaints about customers, offered kindness when Kate needed it most. How much of that had been real? Kate wasn't sure she wanted to know. Sasha looked up, smiled automatically, then faltered as she saw Kate's expression. "Hey," she said too brightly, "you okay? Rough day?" Kate didn't answer immediately. She simply held up the flash drive. Sasha's face paled visibly, the mask slipping just for a second before she forced it back into place. "Where'd you get that?" Sasha whispered, voice trembling. "Does it matter?" Kate said quietly, her voice calm, terrifying in its stillness. "Why, Sasha? Why would you do this?" Sasha's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before she found her voice. "I didn't mean to. Leon promised." She stopped, realizing too late how pathetic the excuse sounded. Kate shook her head slowly. "You sold me out for a promise, for scraps." Tears welled in Sasha's eyes. "It wasn't like that." Kate cut her off with a glance. "It was exactly like that." Her heart broke, even as she spoke the words. She hadn't realized how badly she needed to believe that someone, anyone, cared without an agenda. "I trusted you." The words were a knife twisting in her own gut. Sasha crumbled into a whisper of apology, but Kate was already walking away. She didn't report Sasha. She didn't need to. Some betrayals punished themselves. Instead, she headed straight to Ethan's office, flash drive in hand. He was on a call, but hung up immediately when he saw her face. Without a word, she slid the evidence across the desk. Ethan reviewed it quickly, his mouth hardening into a grim line. "It's worse than I thought," he muttered. "Leon's playing. Dirtier than usual." Kate sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "What do we do now?" Ethan stood and moved to the window, hands shoved into his pockets. "We expose them," he said. "All of them. No more defense. We go nuclear." Kate's breath hitched. There was no coming back from that. No forgiveness. No second chances. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Ethan turned, his gaze flint hard. "They came for you because you were rising. If we don't end them now, they'll never stop." A silence stretched between them, thick, inevitable. Kate realized that somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about the community center, about promotions, about appearances. This was about survival, about dignity, about refusing to let the world grind her back into dust. She straightened, her spine, and met Ethan's gaze unflinching. "Then let's burn it all down." And somewhere deep in the city's veins, Leon received a message warning him. Kate Collins wasn't done fighting yet. The next morning, Ward Enterprises felt different, charged, like the air itself was holding its breath. Kate walked through the halls, folder under one arm, her steps deliberate. People whispered as she passed, but she didn't flinch. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. She had work to do and a war to finish. In Ethan's office, the final plans were already unfolding. Legal teams had compiled every dirty transaction Leon had touched in the last 2 years. HR had unearthed complaints he had buried. Finance had flagged budget discrepancies hidden under innocuous labels. It wasn't just a counterattack anymore. It was an execution, a precision strike that would leave nothing standing. Ethan paced while Kate sat at the conference table, absorbing every detail. "We leak it all," he said. Anonymous tip-offs to regulatory agencies. Quiet conversations with board members. Let the sharks smell blood and turn on him. Kate's stomach churned at the ruthlessness, but she understood now. This wasn't cruelty. It was survival. And survival required teeth. For the first time, Ethan hesitated. He studied her carefully, almost searching for something. "You don't have to be part of this," he said quietly. "I can shield you." Kate looked up, surprised by the offer. It would be easy to step back, let Ethan do the dirty work. Easy, but wrong. "No," she said firmly. "If they want a villain, I'll give them one." That afternoon, Kate attended her first private board meeting, this time not as a suspect, but as a witness. She laid out the evidence with cold precision, answering questions with unflinching honesty. Leon wasn't present yet, but his absence spoke volumes. The board members listened uncomfortable, shuffling papers, exchanging wary glances. Power was shifting and they could feel it. After the meeting, Ethan cornered two senior directors in the hall, speaking in low, clipped tones Kate couldn't hear. Deals were being made in real time, alliances forged in whispers. Kate watched, uneasy. She knew this was necessary. But she also knew that power didn't come without a cost, and she wondered how many pieces of herself she would lose before this was over. Late that evening, as the city bled neon into the night, Ethan and Kate sat across from each other at a quiet bar. Neither of them spoke much. Words felt unnecessary now. They drank in silence, two soldiers on the eve of battle, finding comfort in shared exhaustion. Finally, Ethan broke the quiet. "You're not the girl who walked into Brewhouse 6 months ago," he said. Kate gave a faint smile. "Maybe she was never real." Ethan shook his head slowly. "She was real. She just didn't know how dangerous she could be." The words settled between them, heavy and electric. Kate sipped her drink, feeling the heat of them bloom in her chest. She didn't know if she liked the person she was becoming, but she knew she could never go back. When they left the bar, Ethan's driver was waiting. The city around them pulsed with invisible threats, but Kate felt steady, grounded. They rode in silence for a while before Ethan finally said, almost casually, "Leon's planning something big. We have a leak inside still feeding him information." Kate stiffened. Another betrayal, another knife waiting for her back. "I'll find out who it is," Ethan promised. His voice was a blade. "But until then, you need to be ready for anything." Kate nodded once, the decision already made. She wouldn't crumble this time. She wouldn't freeze. If the world wanted a villain, she would become their worst nightmare. No more apologies, no more mercy. The next morning, Kate arrived at the office early again, nerves coiled tight inside her chest. A folder sat on her desk, unmarked. She opened it cautiously, and her breath caught. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough. Ethan, Leon, together, years ago, smiling like old friends, standing shoulder to shoulder like brothers. Shock punched her in the gut. She read the small note clipped to the last photo. Nothing is what it seems. Doubt slithered into her mind, dark and poisonous. Had Ethan known Leon's tactics all along? Had she been a pawn from the start? She slammed the folder shut, heart hammering wildly. She needed answers. Now. She marched to Ethan's office without knocking, throwing the door open so hard it hit the wall with a loud bang. Ethan looked up from his desk, surprise flashing across his face. "Kate?" She tossed the folder onto his desk, face burning with betrayal. "Explain," she demanded, voice shaking with rage and something far more dangerous, heartbreak. Ethan's expression hardened as he flipped through the photos. He closed the folder slowly, deliberately, then met her gaze head-on. "It's time you heard the whole story," he said, voice low and heavy with secrets. "And after you do, you'll have to decide whether you can trust me or walk away for good." And Kate realized with a sick certainty, this war wasn't just outside, it was inside too. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt cavernous, the walls pressing inward. Kate's heart thundered in her chest, her fists clenched at her sides. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes shuttered, as if weighing the weight of the truth against the risk of losing her. Finally, he let out a slow breath. "Leon and I," he said, voice rough, "were friends. A long time ago." Kate said nothing. She needed more. She deserved more. Ethan rubbed his face, exhaustion bleeding through his usually impenetrable mask. "We built this empire together," he continued, "but ambition doesn't forgive weakness or betrayal." His mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "Leon wanted shortcuts, deals that would have sunk us. I refused. He didn't." Kate crossed her arms, skepticism curling in her gut. "You expect me to believe you were innocent?" Ethan's eyes snapped to hers, furious and pleading all at once. "I'm not innocent," he said. "Not by a damn mile. But I didn't cross the lines. Leon did. I just didn't stop him soon enough." The confession hung heavy between them. "He embezzled," Ethan said bluntly. "Siphoned millions through shell accounts. I found out too late. I covered it because exposing him would have destroyed the company, destroyed everything we built. So I let him walk. I paid him off quietly, locked him out, thought it was over." He laughed bitterly. "But men like Leon don't forget. They don't forgive." Kate's mind raced. This wasn't a simple rivalry. This was blood feud. Betrayal piled upon betrayal, and she was caught in the crossfire. "You should have told me," she said, voice trembling. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing. "I wanted to protect you," he snapped. Then softer. "I wanted to believe he wouldn't come after you. I was wrong." She turned toward the windows, staring at her reflection. Ghostly, uncertain. "I trusted you," she whispered. Ethan froze, the words hitting him like a blow. "Kate," he said hoarsely, "I still need you to trust me. We can end this together." She closed her eyes, the weight of choices pressing down so hard she thought she might shatter. When she turned back to face him, something inside her had hardened. She was tired of being collateral damage, tired of surviving other people's wars. "Fine," she said, voice flat. "We finish this, but after—" She hesitated. "After I decide if I stay." Ethan flinched, just slightly, but he nodded. It was more than he deserved, he knew. The next phase of their plan moved faster than Kate could breathe. Anonymous tips flooded regulatory agencies. Financial watchdogs opened investigations. Ward Enterprises issued carefully crafted statements positioning themselves as victims of Leon's deceit. Inside the company, alliances shifted. People who once whispered about Kate now sought her out, hoping to align themselves with the rising tide. Leon, cornered, retaliated. Viciously. He leaked confidential documents, half true, twisted just enough to cause maximum damage. He fed rumors to tabloids about Kate and Ethan's relationship. He played the victim card, painting Kate as a manipulative gold digger who had poisoned Ethan against his oldest friend. The smear campaign was brutal, personal, and it worked. Public opinion turned ugly. For the first time, Kate saw fear flicker in Ethan's eyes, not fear for himself, fear for her. "They'll crucify you," he warned one night, after another brutal headline. "They'll eat you alive." Kate wiped tears from her cheeks, setting her jaw. Let them try. She was done hiding, done apologizing for surviving, for daring to want more. The final blow came unexpectedly. Late one night, Kate received another anonymous tip, this time a meeting place. Evidence that would seal Leon's downfall forever. Ethan was against it. "It's a trap," he warned. "Let the lawyers handle it." But Kate shook her head. "This ends with me," she said. "Not behind closed doors, not whispered in offices, face to face." She went alone. A dingy warehouse near the river. The air smelled of rust and rain. Kate walked into the gloom with nothing but a slim folder tucked under her arm and a resolve carved from steel. Leon stood waiting, smug and unbothered. "You came," he said, almost laughing. "How noble! How predictable." Kate didn't flinch. "It's over, Leon." His smile widened. "Is it?" He tossed a file onto the ground at her feet. "You're not the only one who can play dirty, sweetheart." Kate picked it up cautiously, heart pounding. Inside were photos, old ones, her at Brewhouse, her helping the homeless, her taking money from customers. Leon leaned close, voice a venomous whisper, a few edited frames, a few doctored accounts, and suddenly you're a thief, a fraud, a liar. Who do you think the world will believe? You or me? Kate's blood turned to ice, and in that moment, she understood. Leon didn't just want to destroy her career, he wanted to erase her existence. Kate stood frozen in the dim warehouse, the doctored photos cutting deeper than any knife. For a heartbeat, panic threatened to swallow her whole. If Leon released these images, twisted and manipulated, it would be over. Not just her job or the center, her name, her worth, her entire future. She could already hear the headlines screaming, "Fraud, opportunist, liar." Leon watched her with predatory amusement, savoring her silence. "You see," he murmured, circling her, "truth is irrelevant. Perception is everything." He tapped the side of his head mockingly. "And perception, darling, can be bought, bent, broken." Kate squeezed her fists until her nails dug into her palms. She would not give him the satisfaction of crumbling in front of him. Instead, she inhaled deeply, shoving down the fear, forcing her mind to clear. "You're right," she said softly, startling him. "Perception is powerful." She bent down slowly, picking up the file from the dirty floor. "But so is the truth, and you're not nearly as smart as you think you are, Leon." His smile faltered, just a fraction. Before he could react, Kate pulled out her phone, already recording. The conversation, his threats, his admission that the evidence was falsified. It was all there, neatly captured. For a second, Leon's mask dropped completely. Rage twisted his features into something ugly and primal. He lunged forward, but Kate stepped back, raising the phone between them like a shield. "You lose," she said quietly, voice steady. Leon froze, breathing hard. Every ounce of charm and power stripped away. "You think that recording will save you?" he hissed. "You're naive." Kate shook her head slowly. "No, I'm just not afraid anymore." And with that, she turned her back on him and walked away, heart hammering, but unbroken. The night air hit her like a slap as she stumbled out of the warehouse. Every step away from Leon felt like shedding chains she hadn't even known she was wearing. She didn't stop until she reached a busy street, blending into the noise and neon. Only then did she let herself breathe, really breathe, feeling the full weight of what she'd just survived. Kate didn't call Ethan immediately. She needed time to think, to process, to decide how to use the weapon she now held. Sitting alone at a diner counter, she stared at the phone on the table, the recording icon blinking innocently back at her. One upload, one email, and Leon's empire would collapse. But she knew better than anyone. Destruction never came without collateral damage. When she finally walked into Ethan's office the next morning, she found him pacing, furious. "Where the hell have you been?" he barked, but the anger was thinly veiled fear. Kate simply held up the phone. "I got him," she said. Ethan stared. at her for a long moment, emotions crashing across his face, relief, pride, something dangerously close to awe. They listened to the recording together, the air between them electric. When it ended, Ethan exhaled, tension bleeding out of his shoulders. "This is enough to bury him," he said. Kate nodded. "But it could also burn everything down, including us." Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his desk. "What do you want to do?" he asked, voice low. For once, Kate realized the choice was hers, not dictated by fear, not forced by survival, hers alone. She thought of the center, the kids who needed it, the future she was building, piece by fragile piece. "I want to expose him," she said, "but I want to control the story. No mudslinging, no scandals, just the truth, clean, sharp, final." Ethan smiled, a real, fierce smile. "Then that's what we'll do." Over the next few hours, they crafted a careful strategy. Legal teams were briefed. Select journalists were contacted, ones with reputations for integrity, not sensationalism. The story would break on their terms. No leaks, no surprises. It would be an act of surgical precision. As the deadline approached, Kate stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ward Enterprises, watching the city pulse below. She felt strangely calm. She wasn't the girl who had once hidden behind a coffee counter anymore. She was someone new, someone dangerous, someone who had fought, bled, and survived. When the news finally broke, it was swift and brutal. Leon's network of lies unraveled spectacularly. Investigations opened within hours. Board members publicly distanced themselves from him. Clients pulled contracts. Allies vanished. By nightfall, Leon Grant was a pariah, his empire crumbling under the weight of his own ambition. Kate watched it unfold without triumph, without cruelty, only a deep, bone-deep satisfaction that justice, however messy and imperfect, had finally been served. She thought she would feel lighter, freer. But the truth was, victory felt heavy too. She had won, but not without losing parts of herself along the way. As the office emptied for the night, Ethan found her still standing by the windows, silent. He crossed the room slowly, hesitating before speaking. "You did it," he said softly. Kate shook her head, a small, sad smile playing at her lips. "We did it." For a long moment they just stood there, the city sprawling endless before them. But somewhere deep inside, Kate knew her journey wasn't over, because survival wasn't enough anymore. Now, she wanted more. The city glittered outside, indifferent to the wars won and lost within its heart. Kate stood by the window long after the office had emptied, her reflection blurred against the glass. Ethan hadn't moved either, lingering near the doorway as if unsure whether he was allowed to stay. The silence between them was thick, not with tension this time, but with all the things left unsaid. "You should be celebrating," Ethan said finally, voice rough from disuse. Kate turned slightly, offering a small, exhausted smile. "Victory doesn't feel the way I thought it would." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding too well. "It never does." He moved closer, careful, like approaching a wounded animal. Kate didn't step back. She just watched him with eyes that had seen too much in too little time. They sat on the worn leather couch in the corner, a relic from a time before either of them had walls so high. "Why didn't you tell me everything sooner?" Kate asked quietly, not accusing, just tired. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration tightening his jaw. "Because I was afraid you'd leave," he admitted. "Because I thought protecting you meant lying to you." Kate let the words settle before answering. "You were wrong," she said, not cruelly, just truthfully. "I didn't need a shield. I needed a partner." Ethan winced, the honesty cutting deeper than any accusation could have. "I see that now," he said, voice raw. "I just didn't want to lose you before I even had you." For the first time, the edges of his armor cracked visibly. The confession hung between them, trembling like a thread in the wind. Kate looked down at her hands, remembering all the nights she had fought alone, all the battles she had survived without anyone to catch her fall. She wasn't that girl anymore. She couldn't afford to be. "You didn't have me to lose, Ethan," she said. "Not then, but maybe now?" he asked, hope flickering in his voice despite himself. Kate hesitated, feeling the weight of the choice before her. Trust wasn't something she gave easily anymore. Love, even harder, but somewhere deep inside, something stubborn and hopeful. Still beat against the walls she had built. She looked at him, really looked, and she nodded once, slowly. The air between them shifted, warmer now, fragile but real. Ethan exhaled like a man who had been underwater too long. He didn't reach for her. He didn't try to fix it with grand gestures. He simply sat there, present, offering the only thing that mattered now, patience. And somehow that meant more to Kate than any apology ever could. In the weeks that followed, the center officially opened. A quiet, ribbon-cutting ceremony, no fanfare, no cameras, exactly how Kate wanted it. She stood before a crowd of children, families, dreamers who had never been given a fair chance, and spoke from the heart. No rehearsed speeches, no marketing gloss, just truth, raw and beautiful. She watched the first scholarship recipients walk across the tiny stage, their eyes wide with possibility. She watched mothers cry as they toured the free clinics. She watched teenagers sign up for job training programs with trembling hands. And she realized, with a fierce, painful joy, that this was why she had fought so hard. Ethan stayed. In the background, true to his word, no grandstanding, no credit hunting, he simply supported her, quiet and steady. Watching him blend into the crowd, Kate felt something ache inside her. Not fear this time, but gratitude. For all his flaws, for all his mistakes, Ethan Ward had kept one promise. He had believed in her when it mattered most. After the ceremony, they found themselves alone on the roof of the community center, the city sprawling endlessly around them. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in violent oranges and purples. Kate leaned against the railing, the wind teasing loose strands of her hair. Ethan stood beside her, close enough to feel his warmth, but not so close he crowded her. "You did it," he said softly. Kate shook her head, smiling. "We did it," he chuckled, a rare, unguarded sound. "You're stubborn, Collins." She laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "You have no idea." And in that simple exchange, something unspoken between them finally healed. They stood in silence as night swallowed the skyline, the weight of battles won and scars earned, settling into something less sharp, less painful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new doubts, new wars to fight. But for tonight, there was peace, hard-earned, fragile, precious, and Kate realized, standing there under the bruised purple sky, that she was no longer just surviving. She was living, finally, fully, fiercely, living. The days after the center's opening blurred together, filled with a different kind of chaos, growth, hope, promise. Kate buried herself in the work, building programs, hiring staff, fighting bureaucratic delays. It was exhilarating but exhausting, a new kind of war that required patience instead of fire. Yet beneath the excitement, a question gnawed quietly. At her, what happens next? Ethan noticed the shift before she did. One evening, he found her in her office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork, a crease of worry etched between her brows. "You're running yourself into the ground," he said softly, leaning against the doorway. Kate didn't look up. "There's too much to do," she muttered. Ethan crossed the room and gently took the pen from her hand. "You built this," he said, voice firm. "You don't have to carry it alone." For a long moment, Kate just stared at him, overwhelmed by the truth of it. She had spent so long surviving, fighting, proving herself that she didn't know how to step back, didn't know how to trust that the foundation she laid wouldn't crumble without her constant vigilance. "You're allowed to breathe now," Ethan said, crouching to meet her gaze. "You're allowed to live." Kate swallowed hard, blinking against sudden tears. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that the world she fought for wouldn't vanish if she loosened her grip. But a lifetime of scarcity, of betrayal, made it almost impossible. Later that night, sitting on the roof of her tiny apartment, Kate stared up at the bruised sky, the city lights flickering like distant stars. She thought about all the versions of herself she had shed to reach this point. The girl behind the coffee counter, the girl who gave sandwiches to homeless kids in the rain, the girl who almost let fear define her. Had she truly left those ghosts behind? Or were they still clinging to her, whispering that none of this was real, none of it lasting? She pulled her knees to her chest, feeling the heavy ache of old doubts rising again. What if she lost it all tomorrow? What if she lost herself in the process? What if she already had? Meanwhile, Ethan stood in his penthouse, staring out over the city he had conquered, feeling hollow. Watching Kate build something real had forced him to confront his own emptiness. He had wealth, power, a legacy carved into skyscrapers, but nothing that breathed, nothing that mattered. He realized now how lonely victory could be without someone to share it with. He wanted Kate, not as a partner in business, not as a symbol of redemption. He wanted her, flawed, stubborn, brilliant, as she was, but he also knew wanting her wasn't enough. He had to earn her trust back fully, not just with grand gestures or protection, but with honesty, vulnerability, things he had spent a lifetime burying. The next morning, Ethan found her at the center before sunrise, reviewing supply inventories with bleary eyes. He approached quietly, almost cautiously. "Kate," he said. She looked up, surprised. "What are you doing here this early?" He took a deep breath. "Making a mistake, probably," he said. "But there's something you need to know." He pulled out a worn envelope, yellowed with time. "When Leon and I split," he said, "I buried more than just evidence of his crimes. I buried parts of myself too. I made decisions I'm not proud of. I destroyed people to protect what I built, people who didn't deserve it." His voice cracked slightly. "You deserve to know who you're standing beside." Kate stared at the envelope, fear coiling in her stomach. She could walk away, she could pretend ignorance, but she had fought too hard to live half-truths. Slowly, she reached out and took it, hands trembling. Ethan watched her with haunted eyes. "Whatever you decide after reading it, I won't stop you." She opened the envelope alone in her tiny office, the walls closing in around her as she read. Names, companies, quiet settlements, deals made in backrooms with blood and signatures. Ethan Ward had built his empire on more than ambition. He had built it on calculated ruthlessness. He had chosen survival over morality, time and time again. Tears blurred her vision, not from betrayal. She had known deep down he wasn't clean, but from grief. Grief for the man he could have been. Grief for the man he was still trying to become. She closed the folder with shaking hands and leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling, the weight of choices pressing down on her chest. When Ethan found her hours later, she didn't scream or accuse. She just looked at him, tired and sad and infinitely strong. "You're not who I thought you were," she said. Ethan's face shuddered, accepting the blow, but then she added, voice steady, "And maybe neither am I." Because survival had changed them both. Because love, if it meant anything, had to survive the truth too, and Kate wasn't ready to give up yet. Not on herself and not on him. Kate didn't sleep that night. She sat in her office long after the city fell silent. The contents of Ethan's envelope spread across the desk like shards of broken glass. Every deal, every name was a mirror reflecting the compromises survival demanded. She wasn't naive, enough to think she hadn't made her own small bargains along the way, but this was different. This was legacy written in ashes. At dawn, she walked the empty halls of the center she had built, touching the walls as if to anchor herself. The laughter of children would soon fill these rooms. Futures would be born here. It mattered, it was real, and none of it would exist without Ethan Ward's ruthless ambition funding it. The truth was messy, complicated, impossible to box into right and wrong. By the time she reached the rooftop, the city was waking below her, bathed in the soft glow of a new day. Ethan was already there, leaning against the railing, hands jammed into his pockets. He didn't turn as she approached, didn't speak. It struck Kate how rare it was to see him still, vulnerable, stripped of all his armor. Maybe he was just as terrified as she was. "You could destroy me," he said quietly, not looking at her. "With what's in that envelope?" Kate rested her palms against the cool metal railing, staring out at the horizon. "I could," she agreed. Silence stretched between them, heavy with all the paths she could take. Revenge, justice, escape, all of them tempting, all of them incomplete. "I built this," Ethan said, voice raw. "On mistakes, on ambition, on desperation. I won't make excuses." He turned then, finally meeting her eyes. "But if you stay, it has to be knowing exactly who I am. No illusions, no fairy tales." His words were a confession and a plea wrapped into one. Kate studied him. This man, who had once been untouchable to her, now stripped down to something painfully human. She thought about everything they had survived together, everything they had destroyed, everything they had built. Trust, she realized, wasn't about believing someone was perfect. It was about seeing their flaws and choosing them anyway. "I don't need perfect," she said at last, voice barely above a whisper. "I need real." Ethan blinked, like he hadn't dared hope for that answer, but Kate wasn't done. "I need you to understand, if we do this, if we fight for this, it has to be different. No more half-truths, no more hiding behind protection. We either burn together, or we don't burn at all." A slow, shaky smile broke across Ethan's face. Not the polished CEO smile. Something raw, almost boyish. He reached out, hesitated, then let his hand fall. He wasn't going to pull her, wasn't going to push. The choice was hers alone. For the first time, Kate saw the cost of control not just on herself, but on him too, and she chose. Not because she needed him to save her, not because she was afraid to be alone, but because she wanted this, wanted him, wanted a future where survival wasn't the only goal. She stepped closer, close enough that their shoulders brushed, close enough that the world narrowed down to just this space between them. They didn't kiss. They didn't speak. They simply stood there, breathing the same battered air, understanding passing silently between them. Later that morning, the final confrontation came. The board gathered once again, this time to discuss the aftermath of Leon's downfall and Ward Enterprises' next chapter. Kate and Ethan entered together, side by side. There were no apologies, no grand speeches, just the simple, undeniable fact that they were still standing and stronger together than apart. Some board members were wary, some openly hostile. But when Kate laid out the plan for the future, transparent funding, ethical initiatives, real community investment, the tide began to shift. She spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had been forged in fire, someone who had nothing left to prove and everything left to give. Ethan backed her with silent, unwavering support, stepping aside when necessary, lending his power when needed, but never overshadowing her. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about partnership. Hard-earned, blood won. They were building something new from the wreckage of old mistakes, brick by fragile brick. As the meeting adjourned and cautious approval buzzed in the air, Kate met Ethan's gaze across the room. Not a fairy tale, not a fantasy, but something better, something real. And for the first time in her life, Kate Collins was choosing the fire with her eyes wide open. The weeks that followed were nothing short of brutal. Cleaning up Leon's messes, rebuilding bridges Ethan had long burned, convincing skeptical investors that redemption wasn't just a marketing stunt. But through it all, Kate stood firm, unbreakable, undeniable. She faced every board meeting, every media inquiry, every cynical whisper with the same steady fire. She didn't apologize for surviving. She didn't apologize for fighting. And slowly, grudgingly, the world began to bend, not to her image, but to her truth. The truth she had earned, piece by piece. The community center thrived, becoming a living monument to resilience. Kids who once had no future found mentors, scholarships, homes. Single mothers returned to school. Homeless teens found job training. And dignity, dreams flickered into existence like fragile flames and stayed lit. Ethan shifted too, though not without struggle. He learned to let go of his need for control, to trust the people around him, to trust Kate most of all. Some days he failed, slipping back into old instincts, but Kate never let him stay there long. Their relationship wasn't perfect. They argued. They challenged each other. They stumbled through learning how to build something not from survival, but from choice, and maybe that imperfection was what made it real. On a cold evening in November, Kate stood once more on the roof of the center, the city sprawling endless. Around her, the air smelled like rain, clean and sharp. Below, the building pulsed with life, laughter, music, voices full of hope. It was hers, not a gift, not a favor. Hers. Ethan joined her after a while, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. He handed her one without a word, standing beside her like he always did now, not above, not ahead, but with. For a long time they said nothing, letting the moment breathe. Finally, Ethan spoke, voice low. "You scared me, you know." Kate arched an eyebrow, amused. "Me? Scare you?" Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "You showed me everything I was afraid to want." He turned, facing her fully, vulnerability stark in his eyes. "I spent my life building walls," he said, "thinking if I had enough power, enough control, nothing could hurt me. But then you walked through all of it, like it was nothing. You made me want things I didn't think I deserved. You made me believe again." Kate set her coffee down carefully, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer gravity of the moment. "Ethan," she whispered, "I'm not perfect. I'm still figuring this out. I'm still scared half the time." Her voice broke a little. "But I'm here." He smiled, soft, real. "I don't need perfect," he said. "I just need you." And maybe that was the bravest thing either of them had ever said. Not promises of forever, just the promise of today, together. The rain began to fall, light and clean, washing the city in silver. Kate laughed softly, tilting her face up to the sky. Ethan laughed too, pulling her close, holding her like something precious but unbreakable. They stood there, soaked and shivering, but somehow more alive than ever. The storm didn't scare them anymore, because they had survived worse, because they had chosen the fire and survived it, because some things once forged in pain. And hope couldn't be undone, not by fear, not by doubt, not by the past, only by choice, and they had chosen each other. As the rain poured harder, drowning out the noise of the city, Kate rested her head against Ethan's chest, hearing the steady thump of his heart, a heart that had been broken and rebuilt, just like hers. No fairy tales, no crowns, no rescue stories, just 2 fighters who had finally found home in each other, and maybe that was enough. Maybe it was everything, beyond the ashes. Beyond Survival, a life worth living together. Wow, what a story, right? I'd love to hear what you thought. Drop a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tell me where you're watching from. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories we have on the channel. There's so much more waiting for you.